Hi, and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's guest is Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Samantha.
Welcome to the channel.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and, of course, spend time with you.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this one. And I know this is going to be a really good episode that a lot of people are going to want to listen to because there's so many questions about group practice stuff that
Sure.
I think you're going to clear up some things for us today, which will be
I
nice.
hope so.
Yeah. So before we get started, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I am Stephanie Purple. I am the owner of Marble Wellness, which is a group practice co-located in St. Louis and Chicago. I have had employees for about 2.5 years now, which means I was a solo practitioner for about 2 or 2.5 years prior to hiring. So we're a general group practice. We started out as primarily seeing moms.
Mm.
It was time for me to hire. I just had to consider what the practice's kind of personality would be. And I decided to include additional specialties based on what my clients were asking me for referrals for. So they kept asking for couples counseling, if I knew anybody that could see their husband, and if I knew anybody that could see their kids. And I was like, I'll just build the practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. So that's a one-stop shop.
Yes, that's literally what we say. It's one-stop therapy shopping for the whole family.
Yeah.
Which works out for a lot of different reasons. We are a private pay practice. And yeah, in St. Louis in particular, we see almost everybody in person. Chicago is something I'm building out. I have a new hire lined up. We're just waiting for the state to get back to her with her license. I'm so excited for her. So what things will look like in Chicago is still a little bit TBD, but I do have Chicago clients that are about half and half in person and virtual, which I imagine will be the spread, maybe like 60% virtual, 40 in person. But yep, that's practice in a nutshell.
Oh, that's so exciting though, because I like that it shows there's room for growth, there's flexibility. So you're not ever locked into one specific thing. You can grow.
No, actually, our most of our therapists, while they definitely have one or two specialties,
Mm-hmm.
most of our therapists see a variety of clients because they prefer that just kind of like spectrum of what they're doing in session.
Yeah.
And it works out nicely for us as a practice because it does allow us to get your caseload a little bit fuller, faster. But it's also fun if you see mostly adults to every once in a while see like an 8-year-old. And that's not something, if somebody doesn't want to see kids, they're not seeing kids.
Yeah.
Have somebody who's like, I like teenagers and I like adults. I like couples and I like adult women. And so, especially when somebody's provisional in our practice, I really like exposing them to a lot of different demographics and presenting problems. Again, not somebody who comes in and says, I don't want to see kids. I'm not putting kids on their caseload. But if somebody's like, I think I like teens and I think I like middle schoolers and I think I like adults, I'll give you several of those because this is the time to learn.
Oh, yeah.
Supervision every week. We're prompting reflective questions, and there's no better way than knowing through exposure to it. And then we'll continue to call into your ideal client as much as possible once you've got a couple months of lots of different things.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense because I think sometimes people feel once they graduate, like you've had this minimal experience in grad
Yes.
school, you should come out with a niche. You should know who you want to work with.
Yes.
And you also don't want to box yourself in too early into your career.
Yes.
So,
Or you feel, because a lot of us do internships with kids and teens, because that's usually where the nonprofit internships are, or because of age that may feel more comfortable, you might say yes to like, my experiences with teens. So yeah, I'll see teens in your practice. And I just tell people, you don't need to tell me what you think I want to hear because then we're gonna have a problem down the road. So let's just be open and tell me what you don't want for sure. I might question it, just litmus test it is the better term. But I don't need you to want to see teens just because that's what you've already seen.
Somebody else will. Somebody else in the practice
Correct.
I love them. I want to see them.
Correct. Or we refer out, right?
Yeah.
If we're not the fit, okay, there will be other callers. So I don't need somebody to say yes to what our callers are just because they think we should have to place everyone in the practice.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that there's certain places, like I know for me, same thing, like working, I'd mostly worked with adults. And then when I started working in community mental health as I was provisionally licensed, I would have a 4-year-old all the way to like a 70 something year old
Yep.
and everybody in between. And so even though it was a big shift to be like, I'm on the floor playing Uno. Now I'm
Yes.
sitting here talking about you being a widow. Now I'm down here talking about what's going on in your high school. It was still
Mhm.
really nice to be able to get all of that different experience and to continue
Yes.
to hone in. And then when I worked with the military, I was like, "Oh my god, I've never worked with so many men before." I kind of
Mhm.
like these old
Yeah.
grouchier men who
Yes.
are coming to therapy for the first time and their whole world is opening up.
Yes.
Never would have thought that if I
Yep.
hadn't have tried it. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
a good point.
Yeah. So I find that really important for provisionally licensed people or for
Mhm.
people that are coming to private practice for the first time.
Yeah.
A lot of our hires are people coming from nonprofit or maybe the school or the hospital. And while you're further along in your career by then and you might have some more knowledge, there might still be a, do you want to try it out?
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't force people, but I do ask people to stay open-minded within reason.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because sometimes, like you said, I've noticed that I have a friend I could think of that was like, I just want to work with young kids because that power dynamic with adults intimidated her big time.
Sure.
But I was like, you're braver than me because I don't want to be with the parents. That's a whole
Uh,
different adult
yes.
dynamic.
Yes.
So, it's just everybody kind of has their comfort zone, but it is better, I think, earlier in your career to test that and just push that comfort zone a little bit and see how far it can expand before you
Agreed.
narrow in.
Yeah, and especially while you are getting that weekly supervision,
Yes.
in a lot of group practices, mine included, there's a monthly case conceptualization. So
Mhm.
able to pull so many different people's experience, expertise. Oh, when I had a client similar to that, this is what we did. And that's
Mhm.
to be trying it out since you do have all of that support
Yeah.
every week. And it's natural to have those questions. And so that's also why I like doing it. Um,
Yeah.
just like that exposure and that learning curve. Because after those 2 years, you're not going to seek out weekly supervision. You don't have the time. You don't need it as much.
Right.
Pay for it and all of that kind of stuff. So in that provisional time, I try to be very mindful of the enthusiasm and the absorption opportunities of what
Mhm.
I- as a provisionally licensed therapist.
Oh, yeah, and I like that you give people the choice, but also encourage that expansion too. So,
Mhm.
like you said, while there's that team support, there's supervision, like you said, there's also different coworkers and stuff. I remember being like, I've got a 4-year-old coming in, and the person in the office next to me being like, "Here's a couple toys, here's a
Yes,
couple." So, with being in person as well, being able to share those resources,
absolutely.
so
Yep.
helpful.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah. We love doing it.
yeah, it's cute. But
Yeah. Thanks.
well, before we get into some of the group practice stuff, I kind of want to know a little bit about your journey to becoming a therapist.
Oh, yeah.
So, what made you want to become one?
A therapist?
Yeah.
Oh, that is a good question that I don't have an answer to. I was a psychology and poli sci undergrad. I double majored because I went into college with a lot of college credits, and so just picked up a second major. Um, then I went to graduate school for a year for sports psychology in Tallahassee because I thought I wanted to work for the Olympics or the NBA. And it was just not the program for me. I was very bored. I didn't like Tallahassee much. I really liked the people in my program, but like overall, Tallahassee and I just weren't vibing.
I've
And I was
been there. Yeah.
really unhappy.
Mhm.
Gone there for undergrad, I would have eaten it up. But I had just left my like most utopian in theory, like undergrad experience. And so I don't think anything would have felt good the year after college for me. So I realized also that I picked a career path that 12 years ago wasn't really a career. So what I would have gotten to do with sports psychology wouldn't have been in my mind's eye what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like, well, I guess counseling it is. And so I went back home to St. Louis, finished my counseling program there, went into nonprofit, worked with homeless and runaway youth and families in crisis for 7 years in like housing
Wow.
capacity. I did only 2 or 2.5 years of therapy there, and then I went into like programs. So I became part of the management team in our department and did a lot of like grant writing, um, program design and development, supervision of social workers and counselors, all kinds of that stuff. And then I left nonprofit and I left my nonprofit job for what I had hoped would be a different nonprofit job because I had drank the Kool-Aid. I wanted to be a chief program officer and then like a CEO somewhere. And the work environments of nonprofit that I continued to interview for, I had learned enough from my previous job, like how to be careful about things. My job was great until it wasn't. There was some turnover. And I am somebody who can very easily like let myself bleed out for causes. And so I was like, I can't find an environment I want to work in. I'll just build the environment I want to work in myself. So that's how I got into private practice. And then the pandemic hit. And as most private practices did, mine exploded. And so that's how I also decided to hire. So that's my journey in a very quick nutshell.
Yeah, that makes sense though. And I like that for you. You were like, here's the path I'm on. And then you had to pivot. Sometimes the original path you're in doesn't work. Or like I've been to Tallahassee. I had a friend who went to FSU, so we went up there for like undergrad, but it's a very young college town too.
It's a young college town. It's a state capital. Most state capitals aren't like thriving.
Right.
But I came from Dayton, Ohio. Like I was not in a thriving place. And so I am my asterisk is very much, I don't know if anything would have made me happy. Because I was just so sad that I wasn't my friends anymore. And they all stayed in the same like square miles and were together all the time without me. So
yeah. So, but that's all important considerations for people as they're choosing whether it's going to be where they go to school or where they take a job or where they get licensed, is maybe having that support, not necessarily seeking out something new just because it's new. Like it's okay to stay in a comfort zone for a little bit longer.
Yeah. But I think also realizing like you can pivot, like there's pivoted so much in adulthood and it's all worked out and it's gotten easier every time. So I think it's so important with careers to realize like everything's changeable and you can make the changes you want to see, but you just have to expose yourself to enough and not think you're right about everything.
Oh yeah.
To myself. Just
like a little reminder. Well, so you mentioned starting a group practice. So it sounds like as far as part of the reasons for why you wanted to was there was a big need. It sounds like with COVID. So part of that, did you always intend to have
this is a good question. And so the caveat there is about a year into having my practice, maybe like 14 or 15 months, I decided I wanted to move out of St. Louis and I decided on Chicago. And so I made that decision at the end of October 2019. So I obviously moved during the holidays. So I said I would do it after the holidays. I wasn't going to move to Chicago in January or February either.
No.
So at the beginning, around mid-March is when I was getting my application together for state licensure in Illinois. And I was literally at my graduate program getting like my transcripts with a notary or the seal or whatever, the like Thursday before everything shut down or the Friday, something like that.
Yeah.
And so the plan was not necessarily to have a group practice because the plan was to move to Chicago and then reevaluate things. And at that time I figured I would lose most of my practice because telehealth wasn't a thing yet.
Yeah.
And so I figured some people would do telehealth with me, but other people wouldn't. And so then when I stayed put because of COVID, it became actually really awesome to have a group practice because that meant I didn't have to start over in an expensive city like Chicago with less income. Because even if I had stayed a solo practitioner virtual, I just wanted to, I wasn't going to like lose all the business and all the reputation I had built.
Yeah.
Like I had done too much work networking and building such a reputation and all of that I was like, now where are all these referrals gonna go? And So it just at that point became apparent that group practice was the really good choice. Like I had done all of this hard work and I wanted it to grow.
Mhm.
And me have to like start over with all of that hard work in Chicago, and me being like, I can still see a client, but no, I can't see your kiddo because I don't do child therapy. Or
Yeah.
this was back to going in person. We were back in person. And that was also why a lot of clients were attracted to our practice, because we were in person. So I would have lost all of that. So that's how I also got into group practice.
Oh, that makes sense. It was a good business decision, but also a good
Yes.
personal decision. It's great for
Yes.
the clients. So
Yes.
it just kind of happened naturally. Like you took a situation that could have been extremely stressful with
Yes.
pandemic, moving states, not knowing what's happening in the world, and
Yeah.
pivoted in a way that benefited a ton of people. I'm sure it was a lot of work, but
Yes.
worked
Yes.
out.
And my solo practice journey was actually really slow. I,
Hmm.
looking back, I have theories about like how it ended up working out and stuff, but my journey building up to a full practice solo was not a good one. And group practice has been the exact opposite for me.
Oh,
So I was also very scared to come up to Chicago and try to figure things out up here, because I wasn't sure if I would have the same experience as I did in St. Louis. And again, big city, more expensive city. And so, yes, the business decision is what drove the decision.
yeah. But like you were saying earlier, it makes sense to then pivot. You pivoted in a few ways then, going telehealth, with COVID, already considering doing it prior to COVID because you're going to move
Yeah.
states. So there was a lot of changes there, and sounds like
Mhm.
being flexible was the key for you and being able to
Yes.
adapt to those.
Yes.
That's great. So when you're hiring for a group practice, what do you
Yes.
specifically look for?
Yes. So, first things first, if we are hiring for a certain type of specialty,
Mhm.
looking for someone at least interested in learning that specialty. So, I like to somewhat pride myself on being a creative hiring mind, right? Like, I don't necessarily need somebody to have experience that exactly fits what I'm looking for. I think a good professional is a good professional. And as long as they have certain qualities and also certain hunger, I can teach kind of the rest. If I'm hiring a maternal mental health specialist and you don't want to work with moms, but you're interviewing, like that's not really,
Yeah.
that's obviously a non-starter. But I don't necessarily need you to have had worked at a nonprofit for moms or at a different group practice where a ton of moms were on your caseload. Um, I much more look for interest in a certain specialty if you don't have the experience, and why. You know,
Mhm.
connect a little bit to why you feel like working with them makes sense, or why your passion seems like it again makes sense.
Yeah.
Good. I also look for people who are humble but hungry, right? So there's definitely an attitude that I've interacted with in some interviews before, and I can just kind of tell if I'm being like used as a group practice owner, or if somebody comes in knowing, thinking they know a lot more than me. And there's a ton of people that I work with at my practice, my employees that know more than me,
Mhm.
but they partner with me, not just like use the practice for their own end.
Yeah.
I'm also looking usually for somebody who wants to be part of a team, because it is a job that to a certain degree is lonely,
Yeah.
because you're behind the closed door all the time. So it's not like you're working on a PowerPoint or a spreadsheet or a grant renewal and you can just be like, I need a break from this. I'm just going to go pop down to something,
Right.
also interrupt their grant renewal or PowerPoint or Excel spreadsheet. And so even though you're with people all day, it's still very different. And so I'm looking for people who just kind of appreciate being able to collaborate with other people when the opportunity comes.
Mhm.
And also, I'm looking for people who often want to grow. Like, I'm building something, we're doing cool things. Um, and so I want people who think that's cool and who want to be part of creative opportunities like groups or workshops or retreats or who just have creative implementation of their own practice, right? So we do
Yeah.
part therapy, and one of my therapists doesn't just do walk and talk. Like she'll take a ball up there if she's working with like an 8-year-old, and they'll play, like they'll
Aw.
side as part of their play therapy at the park. And so that seeing that kind of creative intervention is something that very much works for us.
Mhm.
Our pillars in our practice is like innovative, creative interventions.
That's awesome.
I watch for people talking about that and also
Yeah.
talk about therapy in a person's life. I try to assess how people build out a treatment plan in their head to see if they fit with how we work. We're kind of more of a holistic viewing practice. Like a lot of us talk a lot about kind of food and drink are you having every day? How is your sleep? And I know a lot of therapists are starting to get to that, but I've been
Mhm.
before where people don't ask that. Like, well,
Mm-mm.
if you're cranky, you're sleeping 4 hours a night. This isn't necessarily like you're depressed and we have to figure out depression. Let's figure out your sleep cycle.
Yes.
And so I'm also looking for people who kind of work like that.
Mhm.
Um, let's see, what else do I look for? I just went through interviews like 2 months ago. There's also so for me, it's also somebody we value autonomy in our practice. So I want to hire people that can make decisions about their
Mm.
caseload and who definitely want to collaborate and who are willing to ask questions, but I want to trust the people. I want to trust the decision making of the people I work with. So I want them to know you don't have to run everything by me.
Yeah.
Here's your space to do what you need to do. Let's onboard you hard. Let's train you hard in your initial orientation to the practice. But after that, you don't have to run stuff by me. I hired you and trained you. I trust you.
Right.
Looking for people who can take that confidence and that independence and their belief in their own good judgment, but also know when to collaborate and when to like run that question up the flagpole or when to talk to somebody else about I'm starting to get stuck. What would you do? And that balance can be really interesting. But when you have it, it creates a really cool group dynamic
Oh, yeah.
and environment in general. And then I'm also looking for people who have a life outside of work, right? So we like to talk about people coming to work and working hard. Like I
Mhm.
want you at work when you're at work,
Yeah.
but then like go home, do something on the weekend. Don't check your emails after you get home. We're very cautious about when we send emails. I use
Right.
send a whole lot. So
Oh,
even if I'm working late, I don't want somebody getting an email from me about notes or anything until like 9:30 the next day. So I'll just schedule send it. So I'm also looking for people who kind of have a life outside of work. So
right.
they come into therapy as a fully dynamic whole person
Mhm.
in this work that we do that takes so much of us because you have to go be whole somewhere.
Absolutely. And that's something that I know is not addressed in grad school at all. I mean, everything that I was taught and most people I've spoken to so far has been basically just like for the client, be there for the client. What does the client need? And everything's client based. There wasn't a lot of education I got on how to
Oh,
take care of yourself as a therapist, or even how to be at a place where you know your employer cares about you as a person,
yes.
not just a therapist or workhorse or whatever.
Yes. Yes. And we talk a lot about burnout and I balance, I'm not in charge of you. Like I say a lot, you're an adult professional, right? So I do encourage time off and I will note and observe out loud to you. I've noticed you haven't taken time in a while, even if you don't want to take a whole week. Do you want to take 2 days or whatever? But ultimately it's up to you. And I'm not going to keep nagging you about it, especially if there's like a therapeutic issue there about me addressing it and like you working so hard. Like
Yeah.
I'm working with adult professionals and I will be a good boss, but ultimately you do have to know your road signs.
Hmm.
Take that time. I might stop assigning you new clients so it's less tempting to stay at work or things like that. Um, but I do have to trust you to be able to take care of yourself too. And I will nurture you in that and
Yeah.
like, do you need time off? But I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to week after week fight you on it.
Right.
And that doesn't feel good either. I don't know if I'm expressing this totally in a good way, but does that make
Oh
sense?
yeah, because
Age with you like that, if that's coming from a need that is required.
right, you're not gonna be like their mom. You're not gonna be like,
Yes.
"Honey, you need to stay home from school today." Like,
Yes.
you
Yes.
didn't
But
sleep
I'm
well.
also cautious that like I am a therapist, so there are skills I need to use if
Yeah,
people's management things are coming up, or if
of
knowing
course.
Enneagram is really helpful to how to talk about their motivators or things like that. But it's a very fine line
Yeah.
because it is still a business. And that is actually where having a supervisor that's not the group practice owner, I think, can be really handy
Yes.
because there's so many things I have to do as a boss that can't be as nurturing as if I was only your clinical supervisor, because my job is to look out for the practice as a whole. So there
Mhm.
continue to be jobs to be had. And that means that sometimes I can't always come in as this, I can't always do what works for you,
Yeah. No, that makes perfect
what
sense.
works for the practice.
Yeah, and the clients, because ultimately
Correct.
that's what you're looking at. So,
Yes.
there's going to be certain hard conversations that are gonna be had. So, when you're looking for new hires, you're looking for people who are also healthy in
Yes.
how they're expressing, like you said, asking questions about their life and seeing that they have some of these, like, protective factors in place
Yes.
so that they are at less risk for burnout, which then means they're going to
Yes.
provide better care to their clients. So it all kind of trickles down. But
Yes.
I like that even when you're hiring, the way you're describing it, you're looking at a holistic view of your
Yes.
hires, just like you're hoping that they will with
Yes.
clients. So
Absolutely.
I love
Yes.
that though, because I think it's a personal approach, not
Hmm.
just a very professional, you take a number, you need to see this many clients every week and have it be
Yes.
just like, some places I've been where the focus is mostly on productivity, you know.
Yeah, and we even are really cautious when we are hiring people, especially provisional. We recognize that capacity is sort
Mhm.
of something that's learned.
Yes.
So there are conversations we have that are certainly, if we're building you too fast, we can slow down. If you need a couple months to acclimate to seeing
Mhm.
15 or 18 clients, if we hired them as full time, for example, we'll do that. Like,
Yeah.
it can't be forever. If we hired you as full time, we either need to reduce you to part time if that's where your max is, but we can get there. Like, but talk
Yeah.
to me, right? Because I do not want to be the place where people burn out professionally. So let's
Mhm.
communicate about that. And we also try to do like efficient schedules when people come in, right? Not like a 1 o'clock and a 6 o'clock on one day. And then, so we usually start people with 2 days and get those days full and then add a third day and then add a fourth, just to be really mindful of how people feel at work. And we
Yeah.
talk all the time about, you also have to know when you need a break in your sessions, right? But hold that time. If you only want it to be 30 minutes and then you switch to seeing people in the half hour, that's fine. If you like a whole hour break, if you need two breaks, if you're a highly sensitive person, maybe we need to consider you working a 5-day work week instead of a 4-day work week, or an elongated day so you have more breaks in the day.
Yeah.
A lot of that coaching as well. And also tell people your schedule can change. Here's what I need. I need these hours
Right.
look like. I need these hours and some of them need to be at these times. But other than that, talk to me.
Mhm.
See what we can do together. Because if you don't communicate with me, I can't try to figure out if it is something we can give you. And usually with communication, it is,
Mm.
or we can find a solution for the short term, or I'll say, I can't do that now, but if you give me a couple months, I can rearrange some things. So at our practice, we do have a lot of really good open dialogue, and
Mhm.
we do, I think, and my clinical director, I often say, like, I know people can't tell me this because I'm the boss. So you just give me the feedback I need to know. Not telling on people, but just like you can hear people differently. You can
Yes.
see people differently. Um, and people do know they can tell us no.
Mhm.
And if I'll say like, listen, we have an overflow of clients right now. Do you want to work an extra evening for a couple months? I can give you the clients. It doesn't have to be long term. People know they can say no, and it's nothing. We move right on.
Yeah.
There's no retaliation, there's no punishment. But they also know I'll say yes, but it has to be done by. Great. So we really value that in our practice too.
Oh, yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of collaboration.
we try, there's always going to be a dynamic that I am aware of, that I am the boss and people are going to present to me in a certain way. And I'm mindful of that and I know that, but we do try to be as collaborative and communicative as possible without also burdening people with the stress of over communicating. Right. Because
Right.
information you just don't need to know. That's why you're working in group practice. It's not information you want to know.
Exactly. Yeah. And you don't want, like I saw something today that was like an ad for a notebook that said notes that should have been an email like
Yes.
notes from a meeting that should have been an email.
Yes.
And so yeah, I think finding that line between not, like you said, over communicating, also not being absent, because I've known of people who've been at places where they never even see the owner or the boss. There's no meetings, there's no communication. They have no idea what's happening from the top down. And so being able to explain things and, collaborate where you can and take care and nurture your employees while also making sure ultimately that everything's running the way it should. Like that's a lot of responsibility on a group practice owner as well. And so, which that kind of leads to my next question about, I think there's a lot of unknowns when it comes to group practices where people just, thinking of employees coming in, there's a lot that they don't understand about some of the behind the scenes work that you're doing, or they might not understand certain things about like splits versus flat rates versus part-time or full-time, benefits, costs, things like that. So is there any areas that you would maybe be willing to speak on now to help clear up some of those things from the owner's perspective?
Yeah, it's so funny you said like a lot of them don't know what a group practice owner does, and I literally don't know how to describe what I do in a week.
Everything?
No idea. I have no idea. I see 5 to 6 clients.
Yeah.
I directly supervise anyone, but dang, if I don't work like 50 hours. Yeah, I mean, running a group practice definitely has not necessarily hidden expenses, but the expenses add up, right? It's not just rent, although people forget that rent has to get paid. I think that's a cost that a lot of people don't purposefully overlook, but it's like, no, there's like several $1,000s being paid to a landlord every month.
Yeah.
Furnishing can be inexpensive or expensive, just depending on how much you like to thrift or not. But then there's all the things that add up, like obviously you're paying an admin. If there is a supervisor, you're paying the supervisor for their time. I'm talking from a W-2 perspective. My employees are W-2s.
Okay.
When you're a W-2, I pay for a huge portion of your taxes. If you're a 1099, I'm not. I'm just paying you that, and you then have to save to pay your taxes. W-2s obviously still have taxes, but I'm paying a burden of general liability insurance, workers' comp. In a lot of states, as soon as you have a certain number of employees, you're required to have workman's comp. I pay for so much. I have a spreadsheet. Phone lines are not inexpensive because they have to be HIPAA compliant. So usually then you have to get the phone line and you pay for that every month. And then you pay for the tier above it to have the BAA and the HIPAA compliance. Paying for a website, like your website host, pay for your domain, your Gmail that you have. You pay for the electronic health record system. You usually pay for telehealth to be part of the electronic health record system. And all of that adds up. I think most group practice owners would say that rent and EHR are their most expensive monthly expenses. There's usually an employment attorney you're paying for like general questions, wait, this law came out, like, what does that mean for me? Or, what in my state do I have to offer for benefits? In Illinois, you have to offer PTO for every certain amount of hours.
Oh, wow.
So, and I run a multi-state practice, so I have to keep track of what's what. There's usually, what else? And then, you're usually paying a bookkeeper because you don't have time to do your bookkeeping. Also, everything has gotten really expensive this year. Like I think every single service we've paid for has increased. There's a lot of money that comes out every transaction. Sometimes we refund people, so it's a transaction on both ends.
Yeah.
I'm also paying, I have a second admin. And so, and the admins like help make money, but they aren't direct producers.
Yeah.
So I don't mean that they don't contribute to revenue, but it's not
No, it's
an
cost.
exchange like that. And not all of their work is always about like getting the clients in. So they might end up several hours with one client,
Yeah.
become a client just with like all the phone tag and paperwork.
Paperwork and updates and
Yes.
reminders. And
In addition to all the website stuff, there's SEO that people pay for. Canva Pro and Zoom, if that's something you use. And we'll go ahead and pay for this marketing material. And then that's even before benefits, right? So then there's usually a CEU stipend. We insurance stipend instead of health insurance, because health insurance for our practice would be too expensive. I do a retirement plan. Starting a 401k is base $1,500 just for the software
Oh, wow.
to like start it. And then I pay obviously my contribution for every employee that's on the plan. And then also to like continue to have the software. And so there's just like all of these things that add up. And especially if you're a new group practice or a group practice of a certain size, or depending on what your average reimbursement rate is, that's all part of that. And those expenses aren't always a percentage of that. So Canva is not necessarily going to be 1% of a fee. Canva is what Canva is for that. And just things just continue to add up. You want to get supplies for your play therapy people.
Right.
We pay for a lot of trainings. We do in-house trainings at our place. We do a CEU stipend. And for anybody wanting a specialty, I usually pay for like 2-day training. So I usually end up like paying for several hundreds of dollars of training for every employee. So I'm paying probably, there's definitely a comma in that number, and it doesn't start with a 1.
Yeah.
Here for all my employees. And then there's all the business taxes, right? So as an S Corp or as an LLC, you have to pay taxes from what the business makes. You usually have a tax accountant, you have to pay them for their time. And so I think a lot of people come in and they see, oh my gosh, our fee, what I'm charging is this, what I'm getting paid is this. The rest of the money must be going to the group practice owner's pocket. And it's just not the case. There's several group practice owners that would tell you like their first several months or several years in group practice, they had people in the practice that made more than they did here. And it's a lot of work, right? My employees probably go home and they think about their clients and stuff, but they don't think about the business. And so the mental load that mom is the mental load that group practice owners have a lot. And just like the constant work of it and the risk of it all, right? So pay myself less if we didn't generate a lot of revenue that allows me to pay myself maybe a little bit more. But my people know what they're going to make. It's based on the number of sessions. But I'll take a pay cut to cover expenses or to give us a little cushion if I know we have a big expense coming up. We're doing a website redesign. It's not an expense.
Yeah.
And so you definitely want to get your practice to a healthy enough place that doesn't have to happen, or taking a cut isn't that big of a deal. But that also means like I'm working a lot and not always making what that work.
Right. You're not getting a flat fee an hour for like,
No, I am not.
Admin this hour. Here's your rate. Like,
yes,
you're kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost sounds like you're taking home like the excess, hoping that there's a benefit, that there's
and you set it up so like you make sure you're getting paid a certain. There's a lot of group practice owners that struggle, and I don't want to make this an owners versus therapists issue by any stretch of the imagination, but people calculate what they're making, and they might be making anywhere between like 35 to 65% of what the fee is. And they think that maybe 10% goes to the practice and then the rest for every fee goes to the practice owner. And that's just not at all it, because payroll usually runs group practice owners about 50 to 60%, maybe in some practices more, of what the gross revenue is. And that's before expenses, is business savings, all of that. So 50 to 65%, because you're paying for payroll software too, which is not inexpensive.
No.
and maybe a bonus, right? Like I'll pay people to write a blog once in a while, or um, they can make more money for more sessions. So it's really interesting. And that's why people who go into a group practice have to want it for more than just the fee. You have to like see that the environment and maybe not owning your own business and not being stressed about that. There's a lot of growth in group practices, and ours in particular, we have a lot of opportunities for people to do more. And that gets really hard to do if you're solo. A lot of people love solo, but you can speak just as much. Like it's not, especially to get started, it's not always like a breeze.
No, I had to stop and learn everything because none of this is
Yes.
taught in grad school either, right? Like,
Yes.
unless you have an MBA or something, which most of us
Yes.
don't, there's nowhere that any of this business owner stuff is taught. Nobody even talked to me about taxes in grad school, like nothing that
Correct.
was practical. Marketing, none of the things you mentioned were discussed. So every time that I have had to, think about I don't know, what do I want to do for this business? How do I build my practice? I don't know how to build a website. I have to stop and learn how to do it. And so there's a big learning curve with it. And I think it's important that you discussed what goes into the expenses, because most people, when they're looking for a new job and they're thinking of practices, they're like, why is there a split? Or why is there, this or that? So with you giving more of the back end information, that may help them see that, yeah, there's a lot that goes into it and you do get a split, but here's some of the bonuses. And also I would say on top of everything is that work-life balance.
And the
It's
community.
yeah.
Right? The community is huge. And we do quarterly get-togethers. At least when we have staff meetings, we get lunch for everybody. So there's just all of it. I have a list of expenses for the year. And it's not less than I think 50 lines long, and some of them are annually. And that adds up. It just adds up. And I'm happy to be the one that takes charge of it. I love being a group practice owner. And I love that the people that work for me don't have to have the stress of it, that people can come in and just do therapy, right? Because especially at a nonprofit, you're usually not getting to do the therapy you love. At a school, you're definitely not. Same with a hospital.
Yeah.
So I love being able to offer our therapists, like, the therapy you dreamed about when you were in graduate.
Right.
Here's where it is. We'll
Yeah.
find your niche. We will find your ideal client. I will get you to the point that you're seeing about 70, maybe 80% of that. And then I kind of need you to take some of these other clients, since we're a general group practice. They will only still be clients that you're comfortable with. You get to be around a fun team. We do stuff sometimes. If you want to do more, stick with me. I'll find a way to make it happen for you. If that's a workshop for the community, if you want to build out a retreat, give me a minute. We'll get there. If you want to become a supervisor or a leader, we're headed in that direction. You can, and you can end up like at our practice, a lot of people, and the other thing is like, and your rates increase, like your fee increases with us, right? So when I'm paying for weekly supervision, you are at a lower rate, but like when you're fully licensed, and then if you get specialized, and like pretty quickly your raises become very big deals.
Yeah.
Practice, and that's really important too. Like when you're provisional, like I have to pay somebody to meet with you every week.
Right.
Like be around for when they're not meeting with you too, like an extra hour once in a while. Like
Yeah.
costs money because these people have been in the field for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And paying for you to have more trainings and things like that. So, but once you get fully licensed, your rate goes up a lot. So stick with me and I can give you like a pretty cool job, right?
Yeah.
4 hours of clinical work. You have to realize that that means a couple more hours than that, but it can be a 4-day a week job with you making a pretty good salary, at least at our practice. And I know not every practice is like that, but most group practices, when you're calculating that you're making between like 40 to 50% of what the fee is, that's why the group practice owner is not taking the rest of that. Not even.
Yeah, but I think again that's important for people to remember because when they're looking at jobs and you're seeing here's this set salary for the year and here's this percentage where they can't really predict, then I think that that's a very concrete way of saying expect around that percentage and multiply that by how many people you'd want to see a week for the
Yes.
year. And they can
And make
kind of
sure they do that. Like there's a lot of clinicians don't do that, but calculate your average number of hours by like 48 weeks. Don't
yeah.
do 2 and find that out. I had somebody who hadn't done that. And when we did that, she's like, that's what I'm going to make this year. Yes. She's like, I had no idea. That's a great number. What did you think?
Yeah, because they may be looking at like the 35,000 for this job and going 60% of that. But it's like, no, these are two totally different types of
Yes.
jobs, roles.
Yes.
So I like that you gave a lot of the background because I think that's going to give more education. Because again, none of this was spoken about. I didn't know
Right.
any of this until I started doing business or getting into private practice, seeing things. So I think for people to understand, yeah, there's going to be maybe fluctuations in your paycheck because you're going to be seeing people who are canceling or holidays, or some weeks there's more.
Yep.
But that if they have this work-life balance, if that's where they're at a point in their life, they want to prioritize that.
Yes.
The trainings, like you said, that camaraderie, being able to really hone in on a niche where you can't in a lot of other settings.
Yes.
Then private practice and a group practice at that, especially when starting out, is the way to go.
Yes.
So look for the
Yes.
right one.
And you know, if you get really good at like your clinical skills and your retention, your paycheck won't fluctuate that much. There are weeks, right? Like the snowstorm or like a couple weeks in the summer.
Holiday.
So like I have some clinicians that like don't have cancels. They can rely on what their week looks like at 7 a.m. Monday, being how it looked when it closes Thursday or Friday. And that's a cool place to be too.
Yeah, a lot of stability there, which I know new
Yes.
therapists are craving. So,
Yes.
well, I feel like you gave a lot of different tips for new therapists today or people interested in group practices in general. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to be here and do this.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. I love what you're doing. I think it's
Thank you.
value. So I hope all of your listeners really, I'm sure they do, but just like what you're doing is such an amazing thing for either new provisionally licensed people or fully licensed people new to the private practice side or still trying to figure out their identity in this sector. We're lucky to have you in this space.
Oh, well, thank you. Because people like you are helping fill in the gaps of the things I don't know about or can't.
It takes all kinds, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So, well, I will link all of Stephanie's info below for you guys to follow and see what she's up to. And then my info will be down there too. So if you want to go ahead and continue to follow the channel, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Bye, Stephanie.
Thanks, guys.